Earlier this week, the provincial government released their 26-page back-to-school plan with mixed reviews. The big thing, of course, that most parents are happy with, though, is the fact that students in both elementary and high school can go back to school in person 5 days a week. Now, remote learning will still be an option for those that still remain uncomfortable with the idea of a physical back-to-school setting. To break it down for you, some of the other key findings that matter to you include, in terms of screening, students have to self-screen before they head to school using the screening tool provided to them by the province. The ministry may direct schools to perform daily on-site screening during periods of higher transmission. So that means things like after a Christmas break or a March break. Staff and students are to stay home if they're showing any signs of COVID-19 symptoms and follow the guidance of the screening tool. So this could include contacting your doctor, nurse practitioner, and or getting tested. In terms of masks, it is mandatory for grades 1 to 12 indoors. It is optional, but will be encouraged for students in kindergarten. You can remove the mask if engaging in low contact physical activity or eating, and masks can also be removed outdoors. There are exceptions, which include students with sensory or breathing issues and other special education needs. For recess, your breaks, your lunch, students don't need to stay with their cohort, but distancing is encouraged between cohorts. Shared materials are allowed with appropriate hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette, of course. Students may eat together outdoors without distancing and indoors with distancing. Shared spaces and assemblies, you're allowed. So that includes your homerooms, your libraries, labs, gyms, etc. Different cohort interactions, masking is required, and as much distancing as possible. With visitors, you have to self-screen before you enter the school, and masking will also be required. With transportation, school vehicles can operate at full capacity. With vehicles for elementary students, though, the province is asking that you reduce capacity where possible. Masks are required for grades 1 to 12 and assigned seating. With programs, music, it's allowed in areas with ventilation, singing and wind instruments allowed. With your gym and sports programs, your high contact sports and activities are allowed outdoors only. No masks required for that. Low contact is allowed indoors. Masks are encouraged but won't be required. Field trips also allowed, and I'm sure many parents and students are happy with that. Now, in terms of vaccination, we did hear from the government. It is not mandatory, but will be encouraged. Now, the province also outlines that schools have to be prepared and have a plan in place to revert back to remote learning should there be further restrictions or lockdowns, depending on how the Delta variant progresses during this school year. Meanwhile, the Ontario Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, is criticizing the government for their back-to-school plan, saying it doesn't do enough to ensure the safety of staff and students. Del Duca is pushing for mandatory vaccines for our frontline healthcare and education workers, but what about students? So I asked that question of him, and he says the decision to not make vaccines mandatory for students was the wrong one.
So my older daughter, who is going to be turning 14 later this year, has had both of her doses. Again, we've got to trust the science, rely on the medical advice that we get from the women and men who have that expertise. And as I said last week, I am absolutely comfortable with making it mandatory for students, again, eligible students, again, respecting the Human Rights Code, for sure. This is not as groundbreaking as some people want us to believe. This is not as earth-shattering or as different from what we've done in the past. There's a current process that we have in our publicly funded education system to deal with a whole series of required vaccinations. The COVID-19 vaccination should be treated the exact same way.
Del Duca was also asked if this decision was a political one, considering we are 9 months away from a provincial election. He did say, although he can't really predict the strategies of other political parties, he does suspect that Premier Ford and his political team have decided that trying to secure the votes of what he calls the fringe element of Ontario. So that's your anti-vaxxers, anti-COVID, anti-maskers, and the like. He says that those votes are more important than the safety of Ontarians, especially staff and students. So strong words there. And we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out.